It was the year 2154, and the Earth was no longer the powerful, influential planet it once was. A single colony, known as Colony 12, had remained hidden from the galaxy's watchful eyes. Nestled in a far-off corner of space, it was believed to be the weakest link in Earth's defense. The small, underdeveloped colony sat in isolation, surrounded by towering mountains and vast oceans and few resources. No one cared about Colony 12. It was a forgotten place, far from the attention of galactic politics. The colony had been built with little more than a handful of resources, and its people lived in constant struggle to survive. What the galaxy didn't know, however, was that the inhabitants of this small, remote colony had developed a survival instinct like no other. They were survivors, forced to adapt to harsh conditions. They were not weak, but no one knew that. Yet, on that fateful day, the warning lights blared across Colony 12's control room, shaking the ground beneath the inhabitants' feet. The people had no idea what was coming their way. Out of nowhere, a massive fleet of alien ships appeared. On their radar, their size overwhelming. These ships belonged to the Empire of Arkor, a mighty and ruthless alien race that had conquered countless planets in their search for power. Their fleet was strong, built for war, and their technology far surpassed anything that Earth could defend itself with. They were coming for Colony 12, and no one expected them to lose. The alien empire had studied Earth's history, assuming it would be an easy victory. They believed humans were weak, primitive beings unworthy of their attention. Earth's technological advances were nothing compared to the Arkor's superior weapons. Colony 12, they believed, was no more than a dot in the universe, insignificant and fragile. Aboard the command ship of the Arkor fleet, the alien general, Grolzar, smiled to himself. "This will be an easy conquest," he said with a cold laugh, glancing at his officers. "The humans will fall before us in minutes." Little did he know, his assumption would be his greatest mistake. In the control room of Colony 12, Commander Daniel Stevens, a man in his late 40s, stood at the command console. He was the leader of this small colony, and though he looked unassuming, wearing simple fatigues and tired eyes, he was not someone to underestimate. Commander Stevens had spent years preparing for an event like this, though the world had forgotten. Colony 12, he had not forgotten his mission to protect humanity. "Sir, we have incoming ships, large ones," his second-in-command, Lieutenant Maria Alvarado, said, her voice trembling slightly. "They're not on any of our usual WATCHLISTS ... These are new ships. They're massive." Daniel's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the screen. The ships were like nothing he had ever seen before, sleek, dark, and terrifying in their size. He knew immediately that Earth was in trouble, yet there was no fear in his heart. Years of preparing for the worst had made him ready. He took a deep breath and ordered, "Activate all defenses. Prepare for impact." Maria looked at him in confusion. "Defenses, sir? We don't have anything that could hold off ships of that size." Daniel didn't answer her right away. Instead, he tapped a series of buttons on the console, and the sounds of ancient machines groaned into action. The colony's ancient defense systems were old, so old that most of the galaxy had forgotten they even existed. But these systems had been crafted by some of the brightest minds humanity had ever known. They were crude, outdated, and underfunded, but they were human-made, and that meant they were not easily defeated. The Arkor fleet moved closer, approaching at incredible speed. Their warships positioned themselves above Colony 12, casting massive shadows over the land. Despite the odds, Commander Stevens refused to retreat. He would not let his people fall without a fight. "We may be the weakest, but we won't be the easiest target," Stevens muttered, determination building in his chest as the alien ships hovered. Above the colony, the first wave of attacks began. The Arkor fleet unleashed a barrage of laser fire, raining destruction down on the colony's defense walls. The blast shook the ground, sending a wave of dust and debris into the air. Yet, as the smoke cleared, the colony's shields held firm. For a moment, there was silence. "What are these shields made of?" Gralzar muttered, watching the readouts from his command ship. The shields had absorbed the blast without a single crack. The aliens had never encountered anything like this. They had expected the human defenses to break under the first wave, but they had underestimated humanity once again. As the dust settled, Daniel stood in the control room, his eyes locked on the massive screens that displayed the alien fleet. His hands gripped the console tightly as he fought to steady his breathing. "Let's show them what humans can do," he said softly. Maria turned to him. "What's the plan, sir?" He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he glanced around the room at the crew, his people, his family. They had lived through wars, famine, and natural disasters. They had fought for their survival every single day. This was just another fight. This was just another battle for survival. "We've got one shot at this," Stevens said, "but we're not backing down." The humans of Colony 12 had something the aliens couldn't comprehend: a deep, unbreakable will to survive. What the Arkor Empire didn't know was that the people of Earth had a secret weapon, their heart. It wasn't their technology or their ships that would save them, was their spirit. And in the next few moments, that spirit would come alive in ways the alien empire would never forget. The real battle had just begun. The colonists misunderstood strength. Day had begun like any other in Colony 12. The sun rose over the rugged landscape, casting long shadows over the barren plains that stretched for miles. Life had always been hard here. The people lived with a quiet, determined strength, understanding that survival was their daily battle. They grew their food in small gardens, mined minerals from the earth, and kept their homes simple, as if they knew deep down that life was fragile. The colony was small, isolated, and forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. But those who lived there were different. Colony 12 had been built on a dream that humanity would endure, no matter the odds. When the alien empire of Arkor arrived, they believed they would simply roll over the humans and claim the colony without a second thought. They thought these people would crumble under the weight of their invincible technology. But what the Arkor didn't realize was that the humans of Colony 12 weren't just survivors, they were fighters. Commander Daniel Stevens, with his stern yet compassionate demeanor, had never shown fear, even when faced with overwhelming odds. He had been training the inhabitants of the colony for years, ensuring they were ready for any disaster, any threat, no matter how improbable. The alien fleet's sudden appearance had thrown them into the heart of a war they never thought they would face. But the people of Colony 12 were not as weak as they appeared. "Sir, the aliens are increasing their firepower," Lieutenant Maria Alvarado said, her voice steady but filled with concern. "We're holding for now, but I don't know how long these defenses can last." Daniel didn't answer her at first. He had known the Arkor were ruthless, but what they hadn't accounted for was the sheer will of the people who lived here. These weren't just ordinary humans, they were people who had endured years of hardship, relying on their resourcefulness to survive. Their homes were made of salvaged materials, their tools from scavenged parts, and their weapons were handcrafted from the remnants of old Earth technologies. What they lacked in resources, they made up for in ingenuity. "We've always been overlooked," Daniel muttered, his gaze fixed on the screen displaying the alien ships. "But we have one thing they'll never have: our will to fight." As the Arkor forces continued their relentless assault, a hum of energy vibrated through the colony's ancient machines. The shields held strong, despite the aliens' overwhelming firepower. The first attack had been disastrous for the colony, but it had been a wake-up call. The Arkor didn't understand what they were dealing with. They had assumed that Earth's colonies were all the same, that they would fall under their might, just like countless others had before them. But what the aliens didn't know was that Colony 12 had long since been abandoned by Earth's larger governments. There were no reinforcements coming, no fleets or armies to back them up. The people here had learned long ago that they could only rely on themselves. They had nothing to loosen that made them the most dangerous of all. "We're going to need something more," Maria said, a look of determination flashing in her eyes. "We can't just sit here and wait to be destroyed. We need to take the fight to them." Daniel nodded, his mind racing as he processed the situation. The colony had no advanced weapons or high-tech ships, but they had something else: an idea. While the rest of the galaxy relied on brute force and superior technology, the people of Colony 12 had learned to live with nothing but their wits. "Activate the secondary systems," Daniel ordered, his voice calm but firm. "I want every single piece of technology we have working now." Maria turned to the control panel and began typing furiously, activating forgotten systems that hadn't been used in years. The ancient machines groaned to life, their outdated technology humming with newfound energy. The people of Colony 12 had repurposed old Earth tech to create something new. It wasn't the most sophisticated equipment, but it was functional and it would work. The first alien ships fired another barrage of laser fire, but this time the humans were ready. Hidden sensors, powered by scavenged solar panels, activated, feeding vital information to the colony's aging defense systems. The shields flickered and flared under the intense fire, but they held. For the first time, the aliens saw that the colony wasn't as weak as they had believed. "Impossible," Grolzar, the alien general, growled from his command ship. "These humans are adapting to our weapons." The Arkor forces had been confident that their attacks would break through in moments, but the longer the battle dragged on, the more the humans seemed to resist, adapting quickly to each new wave of attacks. They were relentless, using every tool at their disposal to keep the invaders at bay. The aliens had underestimated the humans' resilience. They had no idea that the colony's inhabitants had faced worse struggles than this had lived through them, and had come out stronger on the other side. The aliens had come to conquer, expecting a quick, clean victory. But what they found was something far more complicated. In the heart of Colony 12, in the midst of their crumbling defenses, the people began to realize something: they weren't just surviving this battle. They were fighting back. Maria turned to Daniel. "Sir, what's the next move?" Daniel's lips curled into a small, determined smile. "The next move is to show them what humans are really made of." As the alien ships rained destruction on the colony, the humans fought back with everything they had. The battle for Colony 12 was just beginning, but already the tides were starting to turn. The aliens, once confident of their victory, were beginning to question their assumptions. In their arrogance, They had misjudged the human spirit. What the Arkor hadn't counted on was humanity's ability to adapt. They hadn't counted on the strength of Colony 12's inhabitants, who would never give up even when the odds seemed impossible. And as the battle raged on, the humans of Colony 12 would show the galaxy just how wrong they were about Earth's weakest link. The first strike of the day had turned to dusk, but the battle was far from over. The colony's once calm landscape was now marred by the sound of explosions and the flicker of flashing lights as alien ships circled above, firing down at the Earthlings below. Each blast shook the ground, sending ripples through the once sturdy walls of the colony. But what the Arkor forces hadn't realized was that every blast only fueled the spirit of the people of Colony 12. Commander Daniel Stevens stood at the command console, watching the chaos unfold before him. Despite the continuous bombardment, his expression was resolute. This was no longer just a battle for survival, which was a battle for Earth's dignity. The humans of Colony 12 had been underestimated for too long, and now they were about to show the galaxy the cost of that mistake. "We can't hold them off forever, sir," Lieutenant Maria Alvarado said, her fingers dancing across the console. "The shields are holding, but we've already lost several sections of the outer perimeter. They're targeting our power grids next. Then it's time for our first strike," Daniel replied, his voice calm yet filled with an underlying intensity. "Activate the last line of defense. We have to make them realize we're not the weaklings they think we are." Maria hesitated, looking at the screen in disbelief. "But sir, let's do it, Maria, now." With a deep breath, Maria nodded and typed the command. The colony's last-ditch weapon, a series of massive electromagnetic pulse EMP devices, came to life. These crude, antiquated devices had been built using remnants of old Earth technology, salvaged and retrofitted over the years. The technology wasn't the most advanced, but it was potent enough to cause the Arkor fleet some serious problems. As the final device powered up, the skies above the colony turned a deep crimson. A loud hum filled the air, growing louder and louder with each passing second. The EMP devices had been set to unleash a pulse strong enough to disable electronic systems in a wide radius. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was humanity's best shot. And then it happened. A massive pulse shot. Into the sky, a wave of energy so powerful that it lit up the entire horizon. The shockwave hit the alien ships like a tidal wave, striking the heart of their fleet. Systems shut down across the Arkor fleet in an instant. Communications went silent, shields flickered, and the ships began to wobble in their flight patterns. "Target locked." "Firing EMP," Maria announced as she watched the chaotic results unfold on her screen. Within moments, one of the leading alien ships, a massive dreadnought, bristling with weapons, suffered a catastrophic failure. Its systems completely collapsed under the intensity of the EMP blast, sending it spiraling uncontrollably toward the ground. The Arkor forces had been thrown into disarray. Grolzar, the alien general, roared with frustration from his command deck. His ships, which had been soaring confidently above the colony just moments before, were now in complete chaos. The once orderly formation was crumbling as the fleet's technology malfunctioned. "What is happening?" Grolzar shouted, banging his fist on the console. "Their primitive technology, it can't be. How did they do this?" The panic was palpable across the Arkor fleet. The humans of Colony 12 had done the unthinkable. They had disrupted the Arkor's technological superiority with a single strike. It was a move no one had anticipated, and it made the aliens question their entire strategy. "We've underestimated them," Grolza muttered, fury rising in his chest. This is not the easy conquest we thought it would be. Back on the surface of Colony 12, Daniel watched as the alien fleet faltered. His heart raced not from fear, but from excitement. He could see it in their eyes, even from afar. The arrogance of the Arkor had shattered. They were no longer so sure of their victory. "Don't get cocky, everyone," Daniel said, looking at his crew. "This is only the beginning. They'll retaliate, and they'll come back harder. But this is our chance to show them that we're not their easy target." The battle had taken a dramatic turn. For the first time, the humans had the upper hand. The Arkor fleet had been thrown into chaos, their pride wounded by the effectiveness of the EMP strike. But this wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about sending a message. The Arkor might have underestimated the humans of Colony 12, but now they were learning the hard way that the weakest link wasn't always the easiest target. The pulse had only lasted a few seconds, but in that moment, the aliens had realized something. These humans, who they thought were helpless and primitive, were capable of striking back when given the right tools and the right mindset. But the victory was fleeting. Grolza, though shaken, quickly regained his composure. "Prepare the counterattack," he growled. "If they want to play dirty, we will show them what real power looks like. Launch the second wave." At that moment, the humans knew they had only bought themselves time. They had disrupted the Arkor, yes, but the real challenge was yet to come. They had made their first strike, and it had been a success, but the war was far from over. "We hold or we fall," Daniel said, his voice steady, "but we will not go down without making them remember our name." And with that, the humans of Colony 12 prepared for the next wave of battle. The aliens had come, expecting an easy conquest. What they got was a reminder of the strength and resilience of the human spirit. They had only just begun to realize that Earth's weakest colony was, in fact, its greatest strength. Hidden technology, the Arkor fleet had regrouped. The damage from the EMP strike had shaken them, but it had not crushed their resolve. They were quick to repair their ships, recalibrate their weapons, and prepare for a far more destructive counteroffensive. The humans of Colony 12, though, were not done yet. In the aftermath of the first successful strike, something began to stir deep within the colony, something that the aliens would never have predicted. Colony 12, though seemingly weak and abandoned, had always been a hub of human innovation. For years, the residents had lived under the radar of the Galactic community, forced to fend for themselves without help or guidance from Earth's distant governments. They had learned to make do with what they had, crafting tools, weapons, and technologies from the scraps of a forgotten world. What the Arkor didn't know was that these scraps weren't just useful tools, they were weapons waiting to be discovered. Commander Daniel Stevens paced the control room, eyes fixed on the flickering screens in front of him. The first wave had been a success, but he knew it wasn't enough. The Arkor would come again, stronger and more prepared. "We've shown them what we can do with limited resources," he said, his voice low but determined. "But now we need something bigger." Maria Alvarado stood beside him, her face etched with concern. "Sir, we've already pushed every system we have to its limit. I don't know what else we can bring to the table." Daniel's eyes sparkled with quiet confidence. "We haven't even scratched the surface yet." With a firm nod, Daniel gestured for Maria to follow him. Together, they walked down a narrow hallway beneath the colony's main structure, passing walls lined with outdated equipment and half-finished projects. This part of the colony was never meant to be seen by outsiders. It was the heart of Colony 12's most secretive developments. At the end of the hallway, a small door led into a hidden chamber, filled with dusty old crates, disassembled parts, and strange machinery. It looked like a junkyard, but to Daniel and Maria, this was where some of the greatest inventions of the colony were born. Deep within the rubble, hidden in the darkest corners of the chamber, was a collection of forgotten technology, a collection that had been quietly repurposed for a moment like this. "What is all this?" Maria asked, glancing around at the piles of old machinery. Daniel smiled. "It's what we've been building in secret. This is our advantage. While the Arkor think we're using outdated weapons and technology, we've been working on something far beyond their imagination." Maria's eyes narrowed. "You mean?" "Yes," Daniel said. "We've been reverse engineering alien tech. The ships we're fighting against, they might have their power, but we have the brain power, and we've been studying everything we could get our hands on. Now, we're about to turn their own weapons against them." Maria's breath caught in her throat. "You're saying we've been preparing a weapon capable of defeating them all along?" Daniel nodded. "It's been a long, slow process, but we've figured out how to hijack their systems. We've learned enough from their tech to give us a fighting chance, maybe even more." As Maria absorbed the weight of his words, Daniel moved toward a central workbench where several alien devices sat neatly arranged. Their design was sleek, almost too perfect, but Daniel and his team had spent countless hours dissecting their components. They had learned how to bypass the alien systems and reap their own technologies to fight back. "We've studied their ships and their energy sources," Daniel explained, his fingers dancing over the controls of an alien device. "What we've learned is that these ships are powered by quantum energy fields, but quantum fields are unstable. You know how to manipulate them. You can override the ship's internal systems. That's exactly what we're going to do." Maria's eyes widened as she understood. "You want to use their own quantum power against them?" "Exactly," Daniel said, locking eyes with her. "The key is precision. If we can introduce a disruption in their quantum field, we can disable their ships, just like we did with the EMP, but this time it'll be more targeted. We'll take down their fleet, one ship at a time." Maria couldn't help but smile. "You've been thinking about this for years, haven't you?" Daniel nodded. "We had to. They may have thought we were weak, but the truth is, we've always been a step ahead. We've just had to be patient." With a flick of his wrist, Daniel powered up a small alien device, which began to hum with energy. The lights around the room flickered as the device came to life, and Maria watched in awe as the energy field stabilized. It was a prototype, still in its early stages, but it was working. "We're not just defending ourselves anymore," Daniel said, his voice filled with newfound resolve. "We're going on the offensive." Outside the chamber, the skies above Colony 12 were once again filled with the ominous presence of the Arkor fleet. The alien ships circled, gathering for another strike. But this time they weren't expecting the surprise that awaited them, as the alien ships prepared to launch their next wave of destruction. Daniel and Maria worked quickly to finalize the system. The weapon they had built from scavenged alien tech hummed in the background, ready for its first test. "This is it," Maria whispered. "Let's see how they handle it." Daniel's eyes glinted with a mix of hope and determination. "Let's remind them why they should never have underestimated humanity." The Arkor fleet, brimming with arrogance, was about to discover just how deadly the humans of Colony 12 could be. They had thought Earth's weakest colony would fall before Then but the tables were about to turn. The humans had uncovered a secret, hidden beneath the rubble of their forgotten colony, and now it was time to show the aliens that even the most advanced technology couldn't save them from a force they had never seen before. An unlikely alliance. The tension in the control room of Colony 12 was palpable. The hum of the newly designed weapon filled the air, a low, persistent buzz that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. Outside, the Arkor fleet circled, oblivious to the trap being set for them. The humans had their new weapon in place, but they knew they couldn't rely on it alone. To win this battle, they needed more than just advanced technology. They needed allies. "Are you sure about this, sir?" Maria Alvarado asked, her eyes still on the flickering screen in front of her. Bringing them in it could complicate things. Daniel Stevens, standing beside her, gazed at the monitor, his eyes filled with both resolve and uncertainty. "We don't have a choice. The Arkor might be outgunned, but they're still overwhelming in number. If we're going to win, we need all the help we can get." Maria nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the decision. The humans of Colony 12 had been isolated for so long that they had few allies to turn to. But there was one faction in the galaxy that had reason to stand against the Arkor One group that had experienced the Empire's wrath firsthand. And it was to them that Daniel was now reaching out. "Prepare the signal," Daniel said, his voice firm. Maria hesitated for a moment before activating a hidden channel, broadcasting a coded distress signal. It wasn't just a plea for help, it was an invitation. An invitation to a group that had once fought alongside Earth's colonies in the past. A group that knew all too well the cruelty of the Arkor. The signal, encrypted and difficult to intercept, was sent to the neutral zone, a lawless region where few dared to venture. The group they sought was known as the Nomads. They were a ragtag collection of rebels, mercenaries, and exiled warlords who had long resisted the tyranny of the Arkor. While they were not officially allied with Earth, they shared a common enemy, and it was this shared hatred of the Arkor that made the alliance possible. Hours passed. The tension in the control room grew as the aliens above prepared for their next strike. But just as the first wave of Arkor ships began to move into attack position, a single message blinked across the screen. "Nomads have arrived." Maria looked at Daniel, her heart racing. The Nomads had answered the call. "They're here," Daniel said, a hint of relief in his voice. "Prepare for contact. It's time to make our move." A shadow passed over the colony's skies. An unusual ship appeared out of nowhere, darting in from the outer edge of the atmosphere. Its sleek, angular design made it almost impossible to spot until it was right above them. The Nomads had arrived. The ship's entrance hatch opened with a loud hiss, revealing several figures cloaked in dark, battle-worn armor. They were a mix of humans, alien deserters, and various other species, one with the look of someone who had fought in countless battles and survived against impossible odds. Leading them was their commander, a tall, imposing figure named Jarek, his eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Daniel as he stepped forward. "You called for help," Jarek said, his voice rough and gravelly. "I hope you've got something worth the trouble." Daniel didn't hesitate. "We've got the Arkor on the ropes. We've developed a weapon capable of disabling their ships, but we need your firepower to back it up. We've got one shot at this. The sooner we strike, the better." Jarek studied him for a moment before nodding. "We don't trust easily, Commander Stevens, but the Arkor. They've burned us all one way or another. We'll fight with you, but know this: we're not in this for the glory. we're in it. To end the Arkor's reign. That's all we need, Daniel replied. We fight together or we die alone. Let's make sure it's the first option. With that, the nomads moved into position alongside the humans of Colony 12. The plan was simple. Daniel's newly developed weapon would disable the Arkor fleet's main ship systems, leaving them vulnerable. Meanwhile, the nomads would take to the skies and pick off the remaining alien forces. The humans and nomads were about to face their greatest challenge yet, dash together as the alien fleet began its approach. The first wave of nomad ships launched into the air. The sound of their engines roared as they cut through the atmosphere, a stark contrast to the quiet desperation that had once filled the colony. These were not the sleek, technologically advanced ships of the Arkor. The nomad vessels were battle-worn, patched up, and scarred by years of warfare. Yet they were fast and agile, perfect for the surprise attacks they were about to launch. As the nomad ships engaged the Arkor, Daniel watched from the control room, his fingers gripping the edge of the console. The moment of truth was here. He had to trust the nomads to hold their ground while the humans executed their final strike. Now, Daniel muttered, his hand hovering over the activation button. The weapon was ready. The last line of defense was set to engage. The EMP pulse had already proven successful, but this time they would disrupt the Arkor's quantum power. Directly, it was a more precise and targeted striker weapon built from their own technology, using their own power against them. Daniel pressed the button. A massive shockwave ripped through the skies above Colony 12, the pulse surging outward with terrifying force. The effect was immediate. Alien ships began to wobble in the air, their systems faltering as the quantum field they relied on was destabilized. The nomad ships were quick to capitalize on the confusion, launching targeted strikes that tore through the weakened Arkor fleet. The Arkor forces tried to regroup, but it was too late. The nomads' precision firepower shattered the remaining ships one by one. In the chaos, the once mighty fleet was reduced to little more than debris in the air. From his command deck, Grolzar, the Arkor general, watched helplessly as his forces crumbled, his fingers clenched into fists, his face twisted in fury. "This can't be happening," he muttered. Staring at the broken fleet below, the humans of Colony 12 had proven themselves. They were not the weak, unworthy targets the Arkor had assumed. They were fighters. And now, with the help of their unlikely allies, they had shown the galaxy just how deadly humanity could be when pushed to the brink. And for the Arkor, this would be a lesson they would never forget. The final stand. The battle was far from over. Though the nomads had struck a decisive blow, the Arkor forces were still regrouping, slowly gathering their strength. The massive dreadnought at the center of the alien fleet loomed ominously above the colony. The fight had shifted in favor of the humans and their unexpected allies. But the Arkor were not known for surrendering easily. In their eyes, this was just another challenge to be met with force, and their pride would not allow them to retreat. Commander Daniel Stevens stood on the command platform, eyes focused on the massive screen that displayed the chaos unfolding above. His hand gripped the console tightly, sweat beading on his forehead. Despite their success so far, he knew that the Arkor wouldn't go down without a fight. The odds were shifting, but the final blow still had to be dealt. "We've damaged their fleet, but the dreadnought is still intact. It's their flagship. If we don't take it down now, they'll reassemble and retaliate," Daniel said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. Maria Alvarado, who had been tirelessly coordinating the colony's defenses, turned to him. "We've used every weapon. We have, and the nomads are pushing hard. But that ship is a fortress. They're not going to make it easy. Daniel nodded, thinking quickly. The dreadnought's shields are still intact, but there's a weakness. It's heavily shielded on the front, but the rear is vulnerable. We need to hit it from behind, no matter what. We've got to disable its power source. Maria's eyes widened in understanding. But we don't have anything with the range or firepower to penetrate it from that angle. Not unless we get inside. Daniel finished for her. His voice was firm now, with a newfound resolve. We've got one shot, and it's a crazy one. We need to board that ship, disable its systems from the inside, and take out its power core. If we do that, the rest of the fleet will fall apart. The room fell silent as the weight of his plan sunk in. It was risky, no. It was borderline suicidal, but it was the only option left. If they were going to win, they had to strike at the heart of the enemy, and there was no room for hesitation. Let's get to work, Daniel said, turning toward Maria with a glint in his eye. Prepare the boarding team. We move now. Hours later, a fleet of nomad and human ships formed a protective barrier around Colony 12. Their mission was clear. Board the dreadnought, infiltrate its core, and disable its power source. If they succeeded, the battle would be over. But if they failed, the Colonian, every last person on it would be obliterated. The ship designed for the infiltration was small, sleek, and designed for stealth. It had been retrofitted with everything the humans had left: cloaking devices, a few stolen Arkor gadgets, and a team of volunteers, brave souls who knew the risks they faced. Among them was Maria, the colony's most trusted lieutenant, and a handful of nomad warriors who had volunteered to accompany the humans into the heart of the enemy's strongest ship. Daniel watched from the command center as the boarding vessel launched into the depths of space, silently disappearing into the distance. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment he allowed himself to reflect on everything that had led them to this point: the endless struggle, the losses, the sacrifices. The people of Colony 12 were fighting not just for survival anymore. They were fighting for something greater than themselves. They were fighting to ensure that Earth, no matter how small, would never be forgotten. On board the Arkor dreadnought, the boarding team made their way through the dimly lit corridors, navigating silently and swiftly. The alien ship was a labyrinth of steel and alien technology, its walls pulsating with energy and power. They knew the clock was ticking. Every moment they spent sneaking through the ship brought them closer to the Arkor's counterattack. Maria led the charge, her pulse steady and her mind sharp. Her nomad companions, rugged and fearless, moved swiftly in the shadows, their weapons ready. There was no room for error. They could not afford to be caught. If they were, the entire fleet would respond with overwhelming force. "This is it," Maria whispered to the team, her voice steady despite the tension. "We get to the power core, disable it, and get out. No second chances." They rounded the corner and reached a large chamber, the power source of the dreadnought. It was an immense structure, a glowing core that hummed with power, feeding the entire ship. But they weren't alone. A group of Arkor soldiers stood guard, their weapons ready. They hadn't been expected, but they were a welcome challenge for the nomads, who'd seen their fair share of combat. The humans, however, had not. Maria motioned for the team to halt. "We can't go in blind," she said. "We need a distraction." From the shadows, one of the nomads, a silent warrior named Zorith, nodded and slipped away. Moments later, an explosion echoed through the halls, a burst of fire and smoke that tore through an adjacent corridor. The guards scrambled, their attention drawn away from the power core. It was all the opening the humans needed. With a flash of movement, Maria and her team rushed in. Guns raised, they engaged the Arkor soldiers in a flurry of strikes and gunfire. The nomads' agility and the humans' precision made them a formidable force. The battle was swift, brutal, and noisy, but it was over quickly. The Arkor soldiers fell, their systems short-circuited by the well-placed shots. Maria wiped the sweat from her brow as the room fell silent. "We're in," she muttered. "Now, let's shut it down." They worked quickly, hooking up their modified tech to the core. It was a risky move. They had to bypass the ship's intricate security systems and manually input the shutdown codes, all while avoiding any automated defense mechanisms that might trigger a counterattack. As the final codes were entered, a loud beep sounded, followed by the sudden shutdown of the power core. The dreadnought's energy began to flicker, its massive engines slowly powering down. The ship was losing its power. It was vulnerable. "Time to leave," Maria barked. But as the team turned to retreat, alarms blared. The Arkor had anticipated this move, and backup forces were already heading their way. A wave of alien soldiers poured into the chamber. "This is going to get messy," Maria said, her eyes hardening as she turned to face the incoming threat. "We fight our way out. No surrender." The nomads and humans stood side by side, their weapons raised. The last stand for Colony 12 had begun on this time. The humans were not the ones on the defensive. The Arkor thought they had the upper hand. They thought Earth's weakest colony was an easy target. But now, as the power of the dreadnought flickered out and the enemy soldiers closed in, the humans had proven that even in the face of impossible odds, they were not to be underestimated. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight to reclaim their dignity and their place in the galaxy, and they would not go down quietly. The last victory. The room inside the Arkor dreadnought trembled, the very walls shaking as the energy reserves began to drain. The core had been deactivated, leaving the ship powerless and vulnerable. But as Maria and her team fought through the corridors, their escape was far from guaranteed. The blast alarms echoed across the ship, warning of the impending self-destruct sequence that would wipe out everything. The dreadnought had been a formidable force, but without its power, it was now nothing more than a massive hulk slowly dying in space. "We need to move, now," Maria shouted, her voice a command as she pushed her team forward. Their objective had been completed, disabling the core, but the Arkor wouldn't let them leave without a final fight. Alien soldiers poured in from every side, their weapons raised as they closed in. The nomad soldiers, their eyes filled with fire and fury, exchanged quick glances. They were not ones to back down. Their ferocity and training made them masters of close combat. As the Arkor soldiers charged forward, the nomads met them head-on, their blades cutting through the air with deadly precision. Daniel, back in the control room of Colony 12, watched the chaos unfold from the live feed. His heart pounded as he saw Maria and her team facing off against impossible odds. He knew the team had a long way to go before they could escape the wreckage of the dreadnought. They had already proven their strength, but now they needed luck to survive the last push. "We've got one shot to keep them alive," Daniel muttered to himself, "one shot to make sure they come back." He glanced at his team, his voice rising. "Activate the secondary systems. We're going to give them a way out." On the battlefield inside the dreadnought, Maria's team fought with the fierce resolve that had carried them through the worst humanity had ever faced, but their numbers were dwindling. The Arkor soldiers were relentless, and every time one fell, another took their place. The nomads and humans alike were exhausted, their energy drained from hours of battle. Maria ducked behind a metal pillar, her pulse rifle smoking from constant use. She glanced at her team, breathing hard. The nomads' bodies were marked with the scars of battle, but they stood strong, unwilling to let the Arkor win. "This is it," Maria said, her voice low. "We make our stand here. We can't fight them all," Zorath, the nomad leader, said, his voice grim. "We need a way out, now." Suddenly, the entire ship shuddered again, this time with more force. The hum of the Arkor's self-destruct sequence echoed through the walls. The countdown had begun. "Where's the extraction point?" Maria demanded, scanning the corridors. A flicker of static buzzed through their coms, and then a calm voice cut through the noise. It was Daniel's. "Head to the auxiliary hangar bay. We've sent you an escape route." "Got it," Maria replied. Her fingers tightened around her weapon as she motioned to her team. "Move out. We've got one shot at this." As the group navigated the winding corridors, a growing sense of urgency flooded through them. The self-destruct was now in full effect, and the countdown was nearing its end. They couldn't afford to stop or hesitate. Every second counted. When they finally reached the auxiliary hangar, the sight before them stunned them into a brief silence. An old, battered shuttle, one of the colony's forgotten escape pods, sat in the center, its engines powered and ready for departure. But there was something else, a force field, shimmering and bright, blocking the shuttle's exit. The Arkor had anticipated the humans' escape and set up a final trap. "They've got us cornered," Zorath growled, his weapon still aimed at the soldiers who were closing in from all sides. Maria's mind raced. The shuttle was their last chance. She turned to her team. "We take out that force field, or we die here." But how? The force field was a complicated piece of technology, far beyond what the humans had ever dealt with. It seemed like an insurmountable obstacle. Yet, in the midst of all the chaos, something clicked in Maria's mind. The technology that had powered their weapon, the device that had disabled the Arkor's quantum systems, could potentially be used again. But they needed a conduit, a way to transfer the energy and disable the field. Without wasting a second, she turned to Zorath. "Can you rewire the shuttle's energy conduits? I think we can reverse the polarity and use the EMP to break through." Eyes flickered with understanding. "It's risky, but I can try." Time was running out. The Arkor soldiers were closing in, and the ship was moments away from its destruction. Maria's heart pounded as she watched Zorath work quickly, his hands flying across the shuttle's controls. The sound of Arkor boots echoed through the hangar as they advanced, but the nomads and humans stood their ground. "We need a distraction," Maria hissed. Now, at that moment, the nomads leaped into action, charging headfirst into the approaching Arkor soldiers. The sound of clashing weapons filled the air, as each nomad fought with the kind of savage skill born from years of resistance. Maria and her remaining team members laid down suppressive fire, trying to buy Zorath enough time to finish his work. Then, just as the countdown clock on the ship's self-destruct hit the final 30 seconds, Zorath's voice rang out. "It's done," he shouted. "Get ready." The energy from the shuttle surged, and with a sudden burst, the force field flickered and then dissipated into nothing. The way was clear. "Go," Maria shouted as the team bolted toward the shuttle. The nomads held the line, their weapons blazing. As they fought with everything they had, the shuttle's engines roared to life, lifting off just as the first wave of Arkor soldiers reached the hangar. The ship's hull trembled as they took flight, narrowly escaping the blast radius of the incoming explosion outside. The dreadnought was falling apart, its systems completely fried by the energy surges from the EMP blast. As the shuttle soared into space, the last thing Maria saw was the massive explosion engulfing the Arkor fleet. The shockwave lit up the sky, the massive dreadnought disintegrating in an awe-inspiring burst of light. "We did it," Maria whispered to herself, her heart racing. They had survived. Against all odds, they had taken down the Arkor. They had proved that even the weakest colony could strike fear into the most powerful empire in the galaxy. And as they disappeared into the safety of the stars, the humans of Colony 12 could finally breathe easy. They had won the last battle. The Arkor would never forget the lesson they had learned.